All right. Hi, guys. I'm Ceresia from the Bronx is Reading, and I'm so excited to present the April book club pick with these two fabulous authors, Helen Hagan and Renée Watson, the authors of Watch Us Rise. I'm going to read a quick bio from my trusty little cell phone. So Ellen Hagan is a writer, performer, and educator. She's the author of two poetry collections, Crowned in Hemisphere and Watch Us Rise, a YA collaboration with Renée Watson. Ellen's poems and essays can be found on ESPNW in the pages of creative nonfiction, Underwired magazine, She Walks in Beauty, edited by Carolyn Kennedy, and I'm probably not going to pronounce this right, Huzach, Small Batch, and Southern Sin. And then we also have Renée Watson, who is the New York Times best-selling Newbery Honor book and Coretta Scott King Award-winning author of Piecing Me Together, This Side of Home, What Mama Left Me, and Betty Before X, co-written with I can't pronounce her name either. I'm going to say Miss Shabazz, as well as two acclaimed picture books, A Place Where Hurricanes Happen and Harlem's Little Blackbird, which was nominated for an NAACP Image Award. She is the founder of I2 Arts Collective, a nonprofit committed to nurturing underrepresented voices in the creative arts, and currently lives in New York City. So I'm so excited to have these two here with us today. I'm going to kick it over to Renée and Ellen. They're going to do a little introduction, talk to you about what Watch Us Rise is, and then have some brief excerpt readings from Watch Us Rise.
Hi, everyone. It's so good to be here. Thank you so much for having us today. So we're going to read a little bit from Watch Us Rise, and we're going to read some of the blog posts from the book. This is a book about two girls, Jasmine and Chelsea, who are best friends. They've known each other for their whole childhood, and they go to a progressive school in New York City. And it's the type of school that's like, we love student voice. We care about you. Speak your mind, speak up. And then when the girls do, the teachers and the principal have a problem with that. And so the girls are rising and figuring out how to get their voices heard. There's a lot of sexism in the school, racism happening, body shaming. And so the girls come together, they start a blog, they start an after school club, and the blog goes viral and starts making change at the school and then in the larger community. And so we see their friendship grow, and we also see how you can use poetry and use art to make change in the world. So I wrote the chapters from Jasmine's perspective, and Ellen wrote Chelsea's character. And we're going to read a few of the poems. A lot of these poems are about body and body image, what the media says about how women should look. And the girls are kind of taking back the mic and putting in their own words what they feel about beauty and body. So I'm going to read a definition poem. So if you think about looking up your skin or your hair in a dictionary, this poem is written as it would read in a dictionary. And these are the stories that Jasmine's body holds. This body, a definition poem. Skin, noun, 1. Sensitive, dry. See Dove soap, oil of Olay, shea butter. See middle school pimples plumping up the night before picture day, always on the chin or nose. 2, dark. See slave. See Negro. See age 7. See yourself playing on the playground when a white girl says, you must eat a lot of chocolate since your skin's so brown. Hair, noun, 1. See assimilation. See smoke from the hot comb crocheting the air, burning a sacred incense. See your mama parting your hair, bringing iron to nap. Hold your ear, baby, she tells you, so she can press Africa out. When Black girls ask, is it real? Say yes. When white girls ask, can I touch it? Say no. 2. See natural. Reference Angela Davis, Dorothy Pittman Hughes, comb yours out, twist yours like black licorice, like the lynching rope used on your ancestors' necks. Let it hang free. Hips, noun, 1. Reference Lucille Clifton and every other girl who knows how to work a hula hoop. See Beyonce, dance like her in the mirror. Don't be afraid of all your powers too. You will not fit in most places. Do not bend, squeeze, contort yourself. Be big, brown girl. Big, wide smile. Big, wild hair. Big, wondrous hips. Brown girl, be.
And this next poem I'm going to read is it's from Chelsea's voice, and Chelsea is really figuring out who she wants to be in the world, how she wants to show up. And so this is an advice poem from herself to herself. Advice to myself, from Chelsea to Chelsea. Be reckless when it matters most. Messy, incomplete, belly laugh. Love language. Be butterfly stroke in a pool of freestylers, fast and loose. You don't need all the right moves all the time. You just need limbs wild. Be equator, lava, ocean floor, the neon of plankton. Be unexpected. The rope they lower to save the other bodies. Be your whole body. Every hiccup and out of place. Elastic girl. Be stretch moldable. Be funk flexible. Free fashionable. Go on. Be hair natural. Try and do anything, woman. What brave acts like on your hips. Be cocky at school. Have a fresh mouth. Don't let them tell you what's prim and proper, not your ladylike. Don't be their ladylike. Their dress-up girl, not their pretty. Don't be their bottled, saturated, dyed, squeezed, spanxed. Be gilded. Gold, papyrus, a parakeet's bulk and flaunt. Show up uninvited. Know what naked feels like. Get the sweetness. Be the woman you love. Be tightrope and expanse. Stay hungry. Be a mouth that needs to get fed. Ask for it. Stay alert, lively, alive and unfettered, full on it all. Say yes when it matters. Be dragonfish. Set all the fires. Be all the woman they warned you against being. Be her anyway.
This body. My body is perfect and imperfect and black and girl and big and thick hair and short legs and scraped knee and healed scar and heart beating and hands that hold and voice that bellows and feet that dance and arms that embrace. And my mama's eyes and my daddy's smile and my grandma's hope. And my body is masterpiece and my body is mine.
To the ads in the subway that try to tell me how to change my body. My body is a tornado, nor'easter, the eye of every storm. Yes, my body a cacophony, song, hydrant of butterflies, collective, not meant to be revised or edited, just exactly right the way it is. My body is a rallying, an assembling. It cannot be shut down or silenced, won't be. We live holy and raucous in our skin. We are not made of fruit. There's nothing sweet about me. My body is a hurricane, natural earth moving and shaking. We who don't shut up or down other girls and the kinds of noise our bodies make. We are a protest of bones and will not be shushed or quieted. We've got our hands and mouths and teeth and breasts and blood all the way up and shining and blistering on up and into the great big blazing sky. Thank you.
That was amazing. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So you two have known each other for a really, really long time. So I'm curious, how did you two meet?
Go ahead, Ellen. I like how Ellen tells the story.
Well, Renee and I have been working as teaching artists. We've been working together. I want to say we've known each other 15 plus years now.
Mm-hmm.
And we really met because we were both working for an organization, an amazing organization called the Community Word Project. And there was a teaching artist training, and Renée came on as, there was I feel like it was like an advanced teaching artist training that Renée came on to. And she came into our classroom. I was teaching with another incredible poet, Lisa Ascalon. And Renée came and sort of was there to watch. But really, Renée, I was like, okay, Renée, you just come up. Renée could taught the class. Like it was just as soon as we, joined each other in the classroom, it felt like an immediate, oh, let's go, let's hang out. Let's talk about poetry. Let's talk about young people that we're teaching. How do you teach a great lesson? How do you get students engaged and wanting to write? So I think it was, we started, I remember we went out to have coffee and in Union Square, and we sort of talked about writing, but it very, very quickly turned into, so what are you doing with your life? And what are we going to do with the future? And I remember so clearly that first meeting being like, oh, this is somebody I want to know, and somebody I feel like I'm going to know in the future. Like that, it was the kind of conversation that just didn't stop. And when we left each other, I was like, oh, I feel like I have more to say and more that I want to talk to her about. Yeah.
Yeah. And so all these years have passed, and we've taught together. We've gone through life together, and then realized we wanted to create together too. So we have collaborated on a few poems for different occasions, for Dream Yard and, different celebrations of our young people that we work with. And then we were like, well, we want to do something longer. We want to write a novel together. So I think I sent her a text one day, and it was just like, we're going to write a novel together. Are you in? Like, do you want to do this? She was like, yes. And so that's what we did. We decided to write together, and it was easy in a sense because we had worked together for so long and had talked about a lot of the issues that are in the book. So we already kind of knew what we wanted this book to be about when we came to the table.
Right. You mentioned DreamYard, which I'm a big fan of. So can you talk a little bit about that? Because that organization is doing amazing work in the Bronx in particular. So I would love for you to touch upon a little bit, both how you found out about DreamYard and your work with it over the years, and why people should know more about the organization. I think that would be really cool.
Do you want to start, Renée?
Oh, sure. So DreamYard is a nonprofit arts education organization that's in the Bronx, with a focus on social justice through the arts. So how do we use the arts to help young people talk about what's going on in the world and help them respond to what is going on? When I was working there, I was a teaching artist for many years. So I taught poetry in middle school and high school classes, and also at the Art Center. And I mean, it's just, when I think about what a community center should be, right? It is this space for young people to come and to be heard and seen and validated, but also a space for the people who work there to listen to the community. What I appreciate about them is that we're not in the community to change the community and to put on, this is what we think you all should be doing, but it's like, what do you all need? How can we come alongside you? How can we work with you to accomplish what you want to see happen in your neighborhoods? And so I've loved working there. I worked there for, I think, almost 10 years. And then after becoming a full-time writer, I'm now on the board of directors, because I was like, I can't leave. I want to stay a part of this organization and continue to be a part of what they're doing.
That's awesome.
I will just add that, it feels very lucky and a joy to be working with people in an anti-racist, social justice-based organization that is actively thinking about what is happening in the world and how that shapes young people, and how do you use art to speak back to the world? How do you use art to heal and to nurture yourself? I feel like as this has happened, there's been a pivot that we've done at DreamYard as active artists. Everybody who I work with is a practicing artist as well. So we're thinking about, as we work with young people, how do they write poems and how are they creating visual art? We've shifted our professional development to figure out we're running writing sessions and open mics and virtual, meditation sessions to figure out like how do we as educators heal ourselves, and how do we actively think about what's happening in the world, and how do we, how do we sort of take care of ourselves as we're taking care of young people at the same time? How does that balance out? I feel like I'll say just one other thing. We had a workshop that BC Colston, one of my coworkers, led for our staff, for everybody involved. And it was a workshop on the 5 stages of grief and how the COVID-19 is disproportionately affecting Black and brown folks. And it was this workshop that to all of us sort of felt like we need to stop and take a step back and think about how do we work in the world amidst everything that's happening. And so I just want to shout that out for DreamYard, because it's been as helpful to me navigating this time as I'm hoping it is for young people that we're working with as well.
Yeah, that was actually going to be one of my follow-up points. Is I can't imagine what the young people are going to be writing about and what the educators they're going to be discussing, after this whole ordeal and grief, because the COVID numbers are really strong in the Bronx right now, and there are lots of people suffering. So I'm happy that they'll be able to use DreamYard to help get some of that off their chests. My next question for the two of you is, what was it like collaborating on a book together? I know you said you collaborated on some poems, but this was such a longer form. And then you also have like editors at a publishing house that you had to work with. So it's like not just the two of you anymore. So it's like, I would love to know what your relationship was like, and if there were any challenges, if you learned any new things about the way you two work together. If there were any pet peeves that you want to share that you've learned, or growing pains that obviously make you a better writer for it, because even though we're all writing and like it can be really solitary, I think that you definitely have to collaborate with people, whether your poems are being published for a journal or a website. Like there's always someone that's going to give you feedback and say like, can you change this word, or I don't understand what your point is here. So just wondering if you can talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, I can start, Renee. I will just say a couple of different teachers or folks have asked us, what was your biggest argument, or what was your biggest, and Renee and I were like, I don't know. It was sort of like, what snack do we eat? Like what? I don't know. What's it going to be today? Like, I feel like it was really, I don't feel like I'm over exaggerating to say it was one of the best creative experiences I've ever had to work with Renee. A lot of this room right here, we wrote a lot of it here. Renee was at that table behind me. We wrote a lot of I'd be at my computer, Renee would be at hers, and we would write these chapters and sort of share back and figure out, we created a timeline together that then shifted and changed as the novel evolved. But it was very much, it was a fun experience to me. I love being in the room with Renee, with somebody else who's being creative. It felt like she would write things that would inspire then and jumpstart me to be thinking about different things. It felt like a really exciting exchange for me as a writer.
Yeah, I think, like you were saying, writing is you're just alone a lot of times. And so for me, it was really nice to have somebody to lean on and work through the problems of the plot and figure out what are we going to do, and does this sound okay? That was so helpful. I don't usually get that as I'm creating, right? That comes usually after I've written something and then I share it with my editor or with a few trusted readers. But to be creating and immediately turn to someone and read it to them and get feedback, that was really helpful. I think as far as challenges for us, it was the editing process at large, which is always a challenge. So it's not that it was because we were collaborating. It's just writing is hard, and you can think, oh, I have this draft and it's great, and we worked really hard on it, and then you get the editorial note and you're like, okay, so we got to go back and do, you know what I mean? And so I remember a lot of times, just by way of, I was just on my email a lot more. So I would usually see Sarah's notes first, our editor. And so I would send a text to Ellen and I would just be like, there's a letter waiting for us. It's, it's going to be fine. Like we'll figure it out. And so that was kind of our process of just talking each other into like pumping each other up and saying like, we got this. It's going to be okay. Even when it felt like, oh my goodness, it's not quite there yet. So there was a lot of revision that took place.
Yeah.
And that was challenging.
Go ahead.
No, I was going to say, I think it's really cool that you two were actually writing the book in the same space. Most co-authors are either like, oh, this person wrote this chapter, and then they sent it to me. I read that, and then I wrote this chapter. Or, they're like plotting out the outline and like going into to do different things. So I think it's really cool that has to have like an added experience to it. Like you said,
for
it's like
sure.
You're feeding off of each other's creative energy, if that is even a thing.
Yeah, no, it's definitely a thing. I mean, we definitely fed off of each other, and yeah, it was one of the best writing projects I've ever worked on because, like we say, we already are friends, so you just want to spend time with each other anyway. So it was like, time with your friend, but also we would talk about what was happening in the world. I mean, we were creating this book with the backdrop of like the Say Her Name hashtag becoming more popular and the Me Too movement getting its, just like being in the conversation a lot, right? And so I think we would come to each other with our own life and like what's happening. Ellen is a mom. She'd talk about being a mom to girls and what does that mean? And we'd have these meaningful conversations and then write. And then share what we wrote. So yeah, it was a very beautiful kind of even healing process to go through it with Ellen. And then the book tour, getting to travel together, it was also a bonus as well. Yeah.
I was just going to say, I think what I learned along the way too was the editing process for a novel too, because my previous books have been poetry. So the editorial process is different. In poems, it doesn't feel like. With edits on a novel, you get one edit in chapter 1 and it changes. It's like the domino effect that, oh shoot, now we have to change everything to the end. So I think that it was very much a pretty big learning curve for me. And I'm so thankful for it because I don't think that had I not been through it with Renee, she really was very much, okay, this is what, she really did call me and she'd be like, you need to sit down. I need you to be calm. And then I'd read it and I'd be like, no, there's no way. We would do it. Every time I would take all those editorial notes. I was like, I can't do it. I'm not going to make it. Then we would do it. And I would be like, oh, this is so much better. This is great. Or, whatever kind of things that felt like they spoke to us and that was the right edit and the right shape. It just, I grew to really appreciate all of that too. The editorial process became, I started to enjoy it more than I thought I would, and I think that has to do with being a little bit older too, and being a little bit, trying to be a little steadier with just being more patient with the work a little bit. That was a good lesson for me.
That makes total sense. It sounds like you've grown a lot. Both of you grown a lot, both in your friendship and as writers, which is really, really cool. And so April is National Poetry Month. And I know for me, I was a very, very angry child. So I took to poetry and would write these poems and not let anyone read them. And then in high school, I wrote this poem and my grandfather had passed away right when I was entering high school. And so I was just this very moody kid. And I remember at the beginning of sophomore year, my English teacher, I wrote a poem and my English teacher said, oh my God, I love this. And I have an idea. It's a crazy idea, but we're going to do it. And I was like, what's the idea? Her name is Miss Madeira. And she's like, I am going to create a play based off of your poem. And you have to be in the play. And I was like, oh my God, no, please, no, don't do this. But then secretly I was like, my poem inspired a play and this character. And so the theme was basically just sick and tired of being sick. I can't take this. right? And it was just a lot. You know, like I said, I was just very angry, dealing with grief, really missing my grandfather. And lo and behold, there were lots of other teens in the class who related, because everyone was just going through various different things at that point, whether it was like challenges with school, challenges with family, you know, losing loved ones, whatever it was. So like my class came together, wrote poems that got put into the play. And so poetry just has like a really special place in my heart. So I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about like when you were first exposed to poetry and what made you fall in love with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry, there was noise in the background, so I was trying not to let that come in. First of all, I love your teacher for doing that. I mean, I think that educators are so important because they are like fanning that flame when you're really young and seeing these gifts and talents that maybe are just so raw and, you know, natural talent. And they can say one thing to you like, I think you are going to be a writer one day, or we should turn this into a play. And that sets you on a whole different path that you might not have ever thought of. And I've had teachers do that for me. So I love that happened for you. So yeah, poetry, I always say poetry is my first love, like poetry and picture books, because that's where I saw my first reflection. Novels, when I was a child, were mostly always white characters. And sometimes I could relate to what they were going through, but I didn't necessarily see myself totally, right, represented. But the poems of Lucille Clifton, Maya Angelou, Gwendolyn Brooks, like I grew up on them, on Nikki Giovanni, and had to memorize them and perform them in school. And I just grew up loving poetry and feeling very much seen and validated. And that was what I wrote first in my journals when I was a young child. I was writing mostly poetry and never thought about writing novels. I always thought I would write like a poetry book or something. So yeah, poetry has the ability to, especially for young people, I think, it's a tool to use to help them express what they're going through, and has been healing. And I can rage and mourn and celebrate also, you know, and I think celebration is a part of resistance and a part of social justice too. So thinking about the small things to celebrate, all of that has been life-changing for me. And to this day, my go-to is poetry. When I'm sad or needing some inspiration, I go to poetry.
Yeah, I will say ditto on so many things, and the fact that you're a teacher, that is a beautiful sort of testament of listening to young people too, like listening to what they need, and then saying, oh, your friends probably need this too. Like, let's gather and be community together. I think that is what I had a teacher in my, I want to say sophomore year, Karen Harriman, who I always think of as sort of this beacon, who saw that I really loved poetry. I was into poetry. I wrote a lot of so questionable poems in my, like, just, I don't know what I was saying, but I was angry and I was sad, but also wanted people to read my stuff, and I would wanted to, you know, and I was super overconfident sometimes, but then nervous and vulnerable, like all the things that make a teenager. I feel like that poetry, you know, got it for me. And so Karen, I feel like my teacher kept bringing me things. I remember she introduced me really to Toni Morrison, and I had read The Temple of My Familiar by Alice Walker, and I was like, oh, I can't. So it felt like novels, but they felt so poetic. And I ended up auditioning to go to this program called the Kentucky Governor's School for the Arts. And it was a 3-week program for artists all around Kentucky. And if you got in, it was an audition based, but it was free for those 3 weeks. And I auditioned in creative writing, and I got to work with Kelly Norman Ellis, who completely changed and transformed really everything for me. She was a part of a group called the Appalachian Poets, a group of writers of color that represent Appalachia. And so then introduced me to Crystal Wilkinson and Nikki Finney, and people who sort of exploded my idea of what you could write on the page, how you could write about about your identity and your, you know, how you show up in the world. I still remember Kelly saying everybody was writing about their grandmas and everybody was using grandma. And she was like, well, does everybody use the word grandma? And so people were like, oh no, I use granny and I use mema and mima. And I remember her saying, you know, language is important and powerful to all these also sort of country kids, but also some kids who were from Louisville and Lexington. It was this sort of group of us from all over Kentucky, and how diverse Kentucky was, because a lot of people would tell you Kentucky is not diverse. It's not a literary place. It's not and I'd heard that when I got out of Kentucky. But when I was in Kentucky, all these writers there were like, no, you are from a rich tradition of artists who have been doing this for a long time. And here they are, you know, and here's proof. So I feel like, and that was a 17, and it really shaped everything I did from then on, you know, and I was always trying to look for, she introduced us to June Jordan and Poetry for the People. And so it was also artists who were doing things that were community based with their art. So I think that was game changer for me too. Yeah.
That's awesome. And then just to piggyback off of that question, why do you think poetry is so important? How accessible do you think it is for young people? We talked about this a little bit, but there are lots of young people who don't read poetry, who don't read at all. But I, for one, you know, it can be really small bites, right? These poems are small bites, and it's like, just read this thing, think about it, tell me how it's making you feel, you know. So that's usually like people when they're like, I don't really read, and I'm like, what about this? So I'm wondering if you also do that. Your book is like a mix, right? So I would love to hear your feedback on that.
I think a lot of times young people don't like, or people in general, not even just young people, but we don't like what we can identify with, right? And so if we're only giving them what are considered like the classics, and teaching them like dead white men, dead white poets, then yeah, I could see a lot of young people being like, I don't relate to that. I don't like this. So usually I use a lot of spoken word with young people first, and free verse, and just get them thinking about what do you want to say and how do you want to say it. And that's what poetry is about. And then we can talk craft and line break and stanza and all the different forms of poetry that there are. But I think it's important first to just bring work into the classroom that is relevant to what people are going through. And it was fascinating to me, like when we were talking about how, you know, teaching in the Bronx, that a lot of the classroom teachers I would partner with, when it would come to the poetry unit, they wouldn't have any Latino poets, any Black poets. And I would be like, what is happening here? We got it. Like, come on, you know? And so, yeah, I think that just starting with that, like make sure young people are being exposed to living, contemporary, diverse poets. You know, they exist and they're writing amazing things about what is happening right now. And I think that is, that's a place to start.
Yeah, I just want to find this place in the book that I always feel like is my favorite, that Bloomsbury, just, you know, Renee and I were like, can we include sections and sort of websites that we go to or things that inspire us? And we have a page in the back of the book that's Poets Who Make Us Rise. And I felt like it was if I had had this as a teenager, and I did, I had a lot of good, you know, poets to look at. But when I think about poets who are, you know, Krista Franklin is a Chicago-based poet who has a new book called Too Much Midnight that's just out, and she had a poetry reading the other day with Avery R. Young, and it felt like an Erica Foreman, and it was like 135, 150 people on the conversation, and everybody was like, oh my God, poetry is amazing. And it felt like there was this, you know, there's this energy around what I think of as contemporary poetry that is, it's like the cool crowd. It's like all these poets that I'm like, oh, I love, you know. And when I think about Araceli Girmay and Elizabeth Acevedo and people who I think about the young people that I work with who are really love these poets and want to be these poets. You know, I think that's the exciting thing about, to me, that what poetry is, what's happening now with young contemporary poets, and then who also are shouting out the older poets who inspired them. You know, I think there's something very powerful about and then I think about like Urban Word or Brave New Voices, any organizations who are celebrating getting young people up on huge stages, the Apollo and the United Palace and at the Andrew Friedman Home, anywhere you get young people to stand in front of a crowd and be like, here's my story, here's what I'm going to say, and I'm going to celebrate who I am, and there's going to be a whole crowd around me that's like, yeah, you know, I mean, I think about how lucky young people are to have all of these mentors and role models in their lives of people who I think of who are just doing incredible and exciting work. So yeah, I feel like poetry's having a good time right now. You know, I think so.
Yeah, I think so too. And when you were saying that, like, young people getting up on the stage, I just had a flashback to like when I was performing my work on stage, and my mom was sitting in the audience, and I was like, oh my God, this is the most scariest thing in the entire world. But there is just something so thrilling about performing your work in front of people. You're going to be scared, like, they're 100%, but I don't know, you just get this rush. And that's the other thing that I love. And I think sometimes when I'm reading regular novels like aloud, I tend to sort of do it as like a poetry slam performance or something like that. And people are usually like, wow, like, are you an actor? Like, do you do like audiobooks? And I'm like, no, that's just how I read. I think it has to do with the love of poetry and slam poetry and stuff like that. You just read a certain way. And so I don't really know how to read like regular dry, nor like, you know, monotone, I guess. I don't know. And that's no shade to anyone else, but people usually are like, I don't know, it was just so animated the way you read it. And I'm like, I can't help myself. I have to do that. So one of my next questions is, I absolutely love this cover, and every time I look at the cover, I think of the two of you. So I'm wondering, did you two have any input on the cover? Sometimes I know publishers will consult with the authors, and sometimes they're like, here's a sketch, this is what it's going to look like, do you like the direction, yes or no? But other times, you know, publishers really listen to the writers, and they'll say like, how do you think the cover should look? So I would love some insidery secrets. I'm burning, you know, I have a burning desire to know. So if you could talk about that a little bit.
Sure. I mean, I will say I feel very blessed that I get to work with a publisher who does include me in the process. So like I'm very hands-on and kind of like at the table when it comes to covers of my books. And so it was no different with Watch Us Rise. We definitely had a lot of conversations. I lost count of how many drafts of covers we talked about and saw. And I think we all agreed in the beginning that the first ones just weren't quite right. And then once we got to what it was going to look like, there was a lot of conversation. I mean, I needed to make sure that Jasmine looked visibly bigger than Chelsea, and not just a little bit, but like bigger than her, and that her hair was natural, and, you know, her skin tone, and that the look on her face wouldn't be sad or angry. You know, I talked a lot about that. I'm very open with my publisher about what I need the characters to look like, because I know that really matters and representation matters. And so, yes, there were lots of conversation around this cover, lots of phone meetings, and lots of emails back and forth looking at different drafts. But I think that's a part of it, right? I think the cover is just as important as the writing to me. And so, yeah, those conversations are worth it and important. And I'm really glad that they hear us and listen, and we compromise. I mean, there's some give and take. I'm not a visual artist, and I'm not in marketing. So there's things that the marketing team is thinking about that I'm not thinking about as an author. So I think we come to an agreement on some things that are kind of non-negotiables. And then other things, I'm like, okay, I don't care about font or, some other things maybe, but these are the things that we absolutely like need and I really want to see. So that's kind of how I approach the conversation.
And I think I love, we talk a lot about this book is really about friendship. It's about these two young artists, activists who are figuring out how to show up in the world together. And so it is I love that they're both represented on the cover. I think it is clear they're friends. I think it's clear that they love each other and working together. And so I feel like I'm thankful about that as the cover too, that they both get to show up in that way. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just love the subtle hints. Like I'm looking at it now, write like a girl. Like I don't know. I don't know if you two had any input in those little subtle
yes.
but, you did. Yeah.
Okay. So like I can share that. Like they definitely, there was a version of the cover where the girls just didn't look like the cool teens they are. Like they're kind of awkward, but they're also, they're teenagers and they represent themselves a certain way. And so we had to really think about their clothes and like what would they actually wear. And so, we talked a lot about, well, maybe we can pull from the fact that they make t-shirts in the story, in the plot of the story. Can we pull that onto the cover? I see a question in the live comments about the title. And one of the titles before we got to Watch Us Rise, the working title was Write Like a Girl, because that's the name of their blog. And so we put that on Jasmine's shirt as a way to just kind of nod to what you're going to experience once you get into the meat of the book. So yeah, we definitely were like, can you make the shirt more like a V-neck? Can you make the sleeves? We definitely, pushed and asked for things like that for sure. And like I said, it was cool that they were like, oh yeah, we can totally add that, and so that's what I mean by we collaborated and tried to make them look more teenage and not as old as they were looking at first.
No. I love that. And then I have one more question before I start going to dive through the chat, which was, what was your favorite thing to write about within the book?
Isaac is my favorite character that I've ever written. Like I really loved creating a character that is a boy, a Black, who is in love with this girl who is big, and he's not trying to change her. He doesn't pity her. Like I really loved writing their love story. And it was a surprise for me. We didn't necessarily have that in the beginning when we first were plotting out the novel, but more and more Jasmine's character was also kind of pushing at me to like, listen, I'm big, but I don't have low self-esteem and I'm not going to be on a diet and I don't want this to become that kind of book. Like I feel like the character was kind of saying that to me. So whenever I was trying to write in a certain direction, it just wasn't working. And I feel like the characters were like, nope, this is what it's going to be. And so, we decided that the love story with Isaac and Jasmine would be really healthy and show how a friendship can develop into more and how you can really cherish a person. And I really, really have fun writing him and their little cute little art dates and things like that. It was really fun to write.
Yeah, I love those parts too. I loved writing. One of my favorite scenes was the last scene where they walk out of the. There's an end where they like the big action and the movements anywhere that felt like things came alive for them and they were like, here's what we're gonna do and I liked the plotting moments. I liked when they're but I like the big sort of the finale was a lot of fun for me to write and I felt like I was. I remember being like, I can always tell if I'm getting something that I feel like is maybe going to be good, and my whole body's into it. I'm like, I'm engaged in it in a different way, and that felt true for the end for me too.
I want to add, there's this Jasmine. She was just this character that I learned a lot from, like as a writer, and as a person. She was very much like, I am already whole. I'm already like her issue of growth was not about her weight or anything to deal with her dark skin. And so a lot of other characters that I've written, they come to this this power, this self-esteem. They come to this like self-awareness and pride, and that's their journey, right? But Jasmine was like, "Nah, I'm already there. And there's other issues, but that's not the issue." And so it just was freeing for me as a writer to let her just be her big brown self on the page without apology, and to celebrate that. So a lot of her poems, she gets to celebrate her body in a way that I was definitely not feeling or writing in that way when I was that character's age. And so it was nice to experience a teenager being there. And I know a lot of young people like that. So I wanted them to feel represented. And I had a lot of fun writing that too.
That's awesome. Sorry, I had some internet trouble. I was gone for like a quick second. Okay, we're good. We have a question from Scarlett. Do you have any tips for writing poetry when you're affected by what's happening in the world right now?
Oh,
Ellen?
Sure. Did I go out a little? Am I back?
Yeah, you went out, but you're back.
Okay. Do you have any? Sorry, I missed that question there. Do you have any tips? Oh, yes. Do you want me to go first?
Yes.
Okay. I missed something. Yes, I definitely, I think having a writing group helps a lot. There's a writing group that Cheryl Boyce Taylor, who's an incredible poet, started in honoring her mother. And there's a group of us, a very diverse sort of multi-generational group that we write together every April. We do 30 poems in 30 days, and we have to send each other by 12. There's a few rules to it of when you send the poem. But I feel like last year, we've done it since about 2015, 2016. But last year we ended up doing, I think we wrote 90 poems. So we did one in April, one in June, and one in September, I think. And it was such a helpful to have to send. I have to write a poem. It doesn't have to be a great poem, but I have to put it out. It can be a haiku. It can be a very short, it can be a tiny little snippet of a poem. It doesn't have to be perfect. Doesn't have to be finished, but it really helps me to have somebody who is waiting for me to send the poem in. I think for Renee and I, we have done a lot of writing days post this book. So we've done a lot of we have to meet, we have to write for a couple of hours, we have to show each other. To me, somebody waiting for me on the other side of it helps a lot. Yeah.
I think also too, right now, writing during this time, I just encourage everybody to take the pressure off of yourself. Mm-hmm. And just let whatever is in you come out. And that might be that you're writing about what's happening and you're processing all of this in the moment. But it might be that there are no words for what's happening right now. And that maybe you just need to keep living through it. And so maybe writing something else, like letting yourself write about whatever you want to write about right now, I think is also helpful. So reading too, it can inspire you to write some things. I've been encouraging people to read poems that bring joy and celebration and remind us that it won't always be this hard. I think that it helps to not always be in the grief and give yourself moments where you can reflect and be grateful and do some other things. So list poems, I've been recommending a lot of just writing whatever the title is and then just create a list. Mm-hmm. And as you revise it, you'll make it be the perfect words for that list. But for free writes, just list poems work really well for me when I'm stressed or going through something traumatic and I can't really find the words. I just make a list.
Yeah.
Those are all good answers. Let's see, we have another question from Lydia. What was your inspiration for creating Chelsea and Jasmine? How was your focus as you developed their characters over the course of the text?
Yeah, I think I can start. I think for Chelsea, there are definitely parts of Chelsea that were inspired by me and were inspired by who I was in high school. I was a little bit over the top. I was a little bit figuring out who I was and maybe doing it in sometimes in ways that were too much, or figuring out what did that look like in real time. But I did want to, I wanted Chelsea to be struggling with who she was and how she was showing up in the world. I think that's how I was struggling. I know several young people who are struggling in that same way. So I wanted that character to exist on the page. I wanted a character who was, I think we wanted to show their friendship, and we wanted to show how much they cared about each other and how much they had fun with each other and were thinking about things in the world, and were, how they navigate the world as artists. So I wanted those things to exist. And so I felt like, I wanted to make sure their friendship was real and felt real and lived in, and felt, like that it represented some of my friendships too. So that's how I think I started with Chelsea's character. Yeah.
Yeah, I think Jasmine is a combination of young girls I've worked with over the years. Some of the young people that have inspired me and that are writing poems and acting and doing their thing while they're in high school, but also my younger self. Like, I wanted to also write about the teachers who were like the strong teachers in the book who support these girls and who are advocating for them. I had teachers like that. I had a friendship group that really held me down, and we wanted to make sure the book, while it is about them rising up and raising their voices, that it's also just about how do you love imperfect people, and how are you a part of a school that you do really love for its vision, but you also can critique it. And so we just wanted to play around with that, like, very real thing, that sometimes the vision of something is really hard to implement. And that means, and in people's lives, that friendships can be hard, but you don't have to quit or cancel everyone. So as far as developing the plot, we knew that we wanted Jasmine and Chelsea to be friends and remain friends through the whole book. But we also knew that realistically, there has to be some kind of, drama between them. Mm-hmm. And so when we decided that it would be about the t-shirts and Chelsea not ordering the right size, like, we were trying to think of what are very real things that friends go through, and how can we show this in the book and still have them work through those issues. So for me, a lot of the inspiration was just based off of real life situations that I've either been through or witnessed because of working in nonprofits and in schools for so long.
Mm-hmm. Should we read it out?
All right. Renee, you recently did a poem called I Am From, and I had students write their own just to share their story on the response to social distancing in their hood. That's so awesome. Yeah. I first wrote or learned about I Am From poems from Linda Christensen, who was my high school teacher and also writes and edits for Rethinking Schools. Mm-hmm. And then as I got older and started teaching, it's a thing, right? That teachers use in the classroom. I often use Willie Perdomo's Where I'm From poem and have young people write. But yeah, I think that is such an easy prompt to get young people immediately expressing who they are, what they care about, what matters to them. I like to do it in the beginning of the school year or the beginning of a residency so that I can get to know my students. I feel like sometimes we get this file on our young people, or we get the this is who they are. And I just want you to know these kids have been through this, and that, and these are their test scores, and this is the stat on their neighborhood, and all the things that we need to know, right? But also I want to know what do my students say about their own lives, and what do they cherish, and what are they bringing into the classroom with them? And I want to honor that. So it's a great way to get to know your students. And I've used it in almost every workshop that I do. We start with that in some kind of way to get them talking about who they love and what they see and what they've experienced in their community. I'm glad that you're using that in the classroom.
Yeah, I was going to say that Renee also just has your most recent article in Publishers Weekly has a beautiful, just talking about ways to make her new book, Ways to Make Sunshine, which is amazing and beautiful. And there were a bunch of prompts that Renee, you put in there for, I've been running this writing workshop and I used all of them last week, and they're beautiful. Thinking about what you're grateful for outside my window or outside my bedroom window, and thinking about sort of the honoring and calling attention to the everyday that's beautiful in your life. So I also think, when you think about what prompts or what sort of things are moving you to write, I've been trying to look at what are other artists inspired by and how can I take a little bit of that and try it out. Everybody had really beautiful pieces. And I wanted to say one more thing, just to speak to the educators out there. There are two books, Writing Down the Bones and Wild Mind by Natalie Goldberg, that I just think are such really, really good jump off points for writing prompts and writing ideas and writing. It's really feels like a meditation on writing of like, how do I keep the pen moving? What are the rules of a free write? I feel like some of those back to basics. I guess this goes to, I think Scarlett's question too, of like how you're writing during this time or how you're being inspired. It's a lot of just going back to some of what feel like the basics of writing. Like, I'm going to time myself. I use timers I've used them less now, but I definitely try to set a timer for even 15 minutes and just try to be on the page in that time and think about, what I can do in that time. Cause I feel like, if you just do that focused amount and don't worry about if it's going to be good, like Renee said, it's like, it doesn't have to be perfect. I just have to get some words on the page. I think that can be freeing for me too.
Awesome. Thank you so much, y'all. I just wanted to shout this out on the screen really quickly. It's blocking Ellen's face. I'm sorry. Okay. But it says, how do you love imperfect people? This really resonated and also gave a lot of hope about how we can work through our relationships and through the conflict that is inevitable and that helps us grow. My students who are in college have really found this message to be heartening. So I'm going to throw a question in there, actually. And lots of people think that YA books are only for teens. And I come from the mindset that books in general are for all ages, right? I think, you judge by the content and stuff like that about what you want to give children. But when I was a teenager, I was reading like Stephen King and stuff like that. So, I am, don't really worry about whether it's a picture book or a middle grade book or YA book. And so seeing this message from this person who's saying that their students are in college, I would love for you to talk a little bit about, even though this book is like marketed for teens, what are the messages that you want adults to get that are reading this book? Because I think for me, at least, reading YA books, because I'm so far removed from my teenage years now, even though I vividly remember, like I have that story of my wonderful English teacher, pushing me to open up and share my poetry with the world. But now when I read YA books, I'm like, wow, I had the same feeling. A lot of the feelings usually stay the same, but it's like, the problems that they're going through can be a little more intense or a little bit different. There's like social media now. When I was growing up, there wasn't any social media. Really, we walked around with like beepers and stuff like that. So it's like a completely different story. But I would love for you to talk about like what you want adults to get from either Watch Us Rise or just like you can even generalize it and say from like writing for young people in general.
I'll just say real quick, Renee, if I could start, because my mother, just as an example of somebody who I'm always like, is my mom reading what I wrote? I don't really know. Well, the answer was she was not, because I gave her a copy of Watch Us Rise, and she was like, it's on my to read. And my mom doesn't read a ton, but she, so the other day she called and she was like, this is a great book. I thought it was only, I was like, great, Mom, thank you. She's like, I thought it was only for, teenagers. I really didn't think I would be that interested. And, she was like, I'm 70 years old, whatever. and it was just and she kept saying, I've been thinking a lot about our relationship, my mom and I, how our relationship was. And she said, I'm thinking about you and your daughters. And so I do think about, as I'm raising a 9 and 6-year-old, I do think of young adult novels and middle grade and things that I'm reading that are sort of highlighting my relationship with my kids and thinking about how my relationship was with my family too. So I don't know. I feel like there's that generational divide that YA can sort of pinpoint, okay, here's all these different relationships in the home and what teenagers are feeling. It sort of magnifies the teenage experience, I think, in a beautiful way. So I feel like, and I also think, there's been some books that my 9-year-old and I are reading together. So I also love that. There's this moment, we can sort of be in this same space together, and she's reading something she loves and she wants me to be a part of that. So I think it sort of bridges those generations too. Yeah.
Yeah, I love the intergenerational reading and bringing a family together or a group of friends and loved ones together to read a piece and then discuss it. I'm all about books being something that then you talk about in the same way that for my family anyway, when we watch a movie together, then we talk about it forever. We discuss it in detail. And to me, that's the fun part of reading something together. So yeah, I think any book can be discussed just like we do with movies. There are characters in movies that are different ages, and we watch those TV shows and those sitcoms and movies, so you can read across ages too, no matter who the main character is. As far as Watch Us Rise and thinking about messages, I mean, I don't know that we sat down and said, this is what we want, people to get out of the book. But I know that we've had lots of conversations around what does it mean to be an activist? And what does it mean to want to bring change and you yourself are still learning? And so these two girls who are so passionate, and in some areas they totally get it, right? And in other areas they have blind spots and they don't think about other groups and they're not fully aware of the bigger picture sometimes, but they still do what they can do, right? And so we've had a lot of conversations with especially college-aged people around how do you still make room for yourself to grow, but not let that be an excuse not to get involved in what's happening in the world. And how do you, on the flip side of that, say, yes, I'm an activist or I'm an ally, and I'm all these words, these titles we give ourselves, but also be humble enough to know that you need to still learn and grow, and that if you make a mistake, you need to apologize. And so I think for the adults, I hope that conversation is happening, that what do you do when you mess up and how do you go make it right? And that there has to be room for that in the movement as well.
Yeah, absolutely. We have a good question from Lydia. I'm still curious about the writing process. I know you worked in the same room at times, but did you each read the previous chapter before you wrote your chapter?
Yes. So we had an outline. We did do an outline, which I normally don't do when I'm writing by myself. But when you have a partner, you kind of have to have a vision of where you're going. So we definitely knew the chapters would go back and forth, Jasmine, Chelsea. And we had bullet points of what needed to happen in those chapters. But the thing about writing is your characters kind of take over, or a scene comes while you're writing, and then you're like, oh, okay, well then if this happens, then maybe I'll have Jasmine respond to what Chelsea just did in the previous chapter. And then we would, add on to the plot that way. So we had a loose idea in mind of what was going to happen, how it would end. But as we were working on each individual chapter, it took a life of its own. So yes, it was some outlining and then some letting the characters lead the way. But we definitely read each other the chapter we were working on and then talked about what needs to happen next.
And then did several rounds of, we would finish it and then read. I feel like we read the whole book out loud.
Yeah, in one setting. Yeah.
Cover to go, page to front to back. And that was a really interesting time too, because you could sort of see the flow of the book, or you could see any points that didn't match, or any phrases. I feel like that felt to me like editing poetry too, because every sentence you were figuring out, okay, did this sentence sound right when I said it out loud? Did I need to change anything in there? So I think the reading out loud and hearing each chapter in each other's voices was a big help too. And that was a big editorial shift. Yeah.
That is wild that you read it out that many times. I can't imagine doing that. But I did have one follow-up question as we begin to wrap up here. Will you two do something again in the future? I mean, this was such a fantastic novel. Thank you so much for deciding to collaborate together and to write it. I really, really enjoyed it. And for those of you who like audiobooks, because since I've been in quarantine, I've been a little fatigued with the feel of a finished book. So I've been playing audiobooks. So this was really nice to listen to on audiobook. But yeah, do you think that you two will collaborate again in the future?
Yeah, I hope so. We've talked about what else we could do together, and I think eventually, yeah, we both have some individual projects in the works, but at some point in the future, yeah, I think we will definitely work together again.
Yes, agreed on all fronts. I hope so and look forward to it. Yeah.
That's awesome. And then I'm going to do a quick fast round with the two of you. Coffee or tea?
Tea.
Coffee.
Coffee. Ice cream or sorbet?
Ice cream.
Ice cream. Ice cream.
I love how both of you are shaking your heads like, what? How is that even a
Ice cream.
Okay. And I've had this debate recently, peanut butter or almond butter?
Neither, because I'm allergic to nuts, so I don't do any of it.
Okay.
Sorry.
I only
Baby downer.
Every time Renee is over for years, I mean, it just stopped. I'd be like, hey, these are treats. Almond, cashews. She was like, come on. I mean, at some point, I always forget. Almond butter for me. Although I like peanut butter too. I'll do peanut butter too.
I like peanut butter too, but there's just something about almond butter that I'm just obsessed with right now.
Yeah, I love it.
Oh, now I'm blanking. Oh gosh. Well, we're going to skip whatever my brain was trying to ask just now. And I'll leave it at that for the fast round because I'm still thinking about almond butter, believe it or not. Yeah. But can you tell us what you're currently reading right now?
Sure. I just ordered a bunch of books, poetry actually. So it's Homie by Denez Smith. And I feel like I want to walk over and grab the books that I just got. I can't think of the title, which is horrible, but Brandy Colbert's new book. She has a book coming out, The Only Black Girls in Town. I think I think that's the title of it. And I read it as an ARC, and I'm super, super excited about that book coming out soon, very soon this spring.
That's on my list because you told me about it when you were I'm never around. I'm gonna pull it out. I just got this Mahogany L. Brown. It's the young poets call to justice. Elizabeth Acevedo and Olivia Gatwood have other poems in there. It is so. My kids have loved it. I've loved it. I think about how I'm gonna share it with students or how I am sharing it with students. And I just started with The Fire on High by Elizabeth Acevedo. I'm about 2-3 chapters. I'm about 40 pages in. It's so beautiful. I got the hard copy and the if you take the cover off, which is also beautiful. Then the hard back, my daughter picked it up and she was like, oh my gosh, it's all fruit and the most beautiful, and it's about food and these two close friends. I'm loving it so far.
Yeah, that book is going to make you really hungry.
I know.
I remember reading it being like, I want to stop and go make this recipe. Like, what?
Skills are like this. So, I'm like, I'm going to get better.
But that's pretty much it from me. Thank you so much, the two of you, for joining us today and for supporting the Bronx's reading. I, do this book club and launched it with the hope that we would spend 1 year of reading authors from the Bronx, because there were so many people after the inaugural book festival who came up to me and said, okay, so what's your next event? And I was like, what do you mean? And they were like, well, we want more. And a few people were like, yeah, I want to have another opportunity to meet authors. What authors from the Bronx do you know? And I was like, I don't know. I can't think of any right now because this is on the spot, because they were asking me festival day. But I took that summer and really thought about, like, what else could I be doing to enrich the Bronx community? So I launched the Bronx's Reading Book Club, and we spent an entire year reading books and authors that were either set in the Bronx or by authors that had a connection to the Bronx. And then after that, book club members, were like, well, can we read more front list stuff now? And I kept thinking, like, how can I, brand this and make it a way that's sort of different from your normal book club? And so for me, as a young person growing up, I had never met an author before in person. I actually thought, if you wrote a book, then you died, and then people read your work. It's sort of like art, right? Like all of the artists, once they're deceased, I feel like everyone's like, oh my God, this person's artwork is amazing. And I'm like, why didn't we celebrate them when they were alive and doing this stuff? So with the book club, we've been inviting authors to come into these really intimate spaces to talk to the book club members. And it's unfortunate that the coronavirus has impacted that, but I'm so thankful to the two of you for joining us virtually, and also expanding it, making it live so that other people outside of the Bronx could also tune in. So thank you so much. Thank you for all that you do, all that you write. I'm so excited to hopefully receive another future collaboration from the two of you, and to continue to read and support your work. So thank you so much.
Thank you. And we will have to come in person once we're back to our new normal. We'll do something in person with you for sure.
Yes, absolutely.
And thank you for bringing this to the Bronx. It's very exciting. We love it.
Of course.
Thank you.
And then right before we sign off, there was someone who had mentioned how they could support, I think it was StreamYard, when you were talking about StreamYard. I'm trying to find Emma.
StreamYard.
Emmy.
You can go to dreamyard.com. There's going to be a virtual benefit that is coming up. You can go onto their website. There's an area that's, I believe it's a benefit link or donate. But you can also if you go onto the DreamYard website, please join us in the virtual open mics. We've been trying to spread the word. We have Alondra Uribe, who is one of 5 national student poets. She's representing the Northeast. She's the first poet from the Bronx to represent the Northeast.
Wow.
She's going to be our feature, along with Andy Powell, on Wednesday, this upcoming Wednesday. Bobby DeJesus is the feature the following week. So it is every Wednesday through as long as I'll be there as the virtual host, and we're going to have some guest artists there. So that's Wednesdays. It's from 4 to 5 p.m. It's a little early, but we are going to do some evening events. So just if you go to the DreamYard website, you can follow along. We have some offerings. And then if you're interested in supporting, that's there as well. Thanks for that question.
Yeah, and then just mention what current project you two are pushing right now, and where people can find you online, and then we'll end the broadcast.
Cool. I'll go.
Okay.
I have a book called Blooming Fiascos that is a poetry collection that's coming out in February from Northwestern University Press, February 2021, and a middle grade novel called Reckless Glorious Girl. That's a middle grade novel in verse from Bloomsbury in February 2021.
Beautiful, beautiful book. I'm so excited about that book. So today actually is the release of a middle grade novel, a special edition that's signed, comes out today, and then the other edition on Tuesday, called Ways to Make Sunshine. It's the first in a series about a little girl growing up in Portland, Oregon, and she's just getting herself into all kind of shenanigans and racing the boys on her bike and trying to live up to her name. Her name is Ryan. Ryan means leader. And so she's trying to live up to her name. So it's the first book in the series, Ways to Make Sunshine. And it's out like right now, which is crazy. but exciting too. So yeah, that's what I've been working on.
Awesome. All right. Well, thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye, everybody.